You're listening to a special edition of Back to Nature, the podcast of Club Groeneveld and Sublime. Inspiring conversations about leadership, nature, and the art of being human. Today, in proud cooperation with ADE Green, a conversation with Olaf Boswijk, founder of the Valley of the Possible and founder of Trouw, one of the most influential dance clubs that closed its doors in 2015. Listen to a conversation about how landscapes create and shape culture and identity, how not to go back to nature but to go forward to it, how intuition almost always shows you the right way, and how aligning with your dreams inevitably leads to success.
Okay, Olaf. Well, maybe a short introduction from my side. This is normally the Dutch podcast called Back to Nature. And I always ask my guests to pick a spot somewhere in the Netherlands in nature. Well, in nature and the Netherlands is somewhat contradictory, but it is possible. And I always ask them to pick a spot that's special for them in nature. Right now we're walking very near Amsterdam, but could you maybe explain where we are, what it looks like, and why did you pick this spot?
We are in Durgedam, which is officially part of Amsterdam, but it's a very small, old village. I always feel it looks a little Scandinavian because all the houses are wood and have different colors, and there's a beautiful old church and a little harbor, and it's next to the IJsselmeer, which is the main body of water next to Amsterdam. And I always like to think that this is the best way or the closest way to get out of town when you're in central Amsterdam. I mean, obviously there's parks and Amsterdamse Bos, but for me this is a special spot. Most of all also because my brother and his family live on an island connected to the little nature reserve here, the Vuurtoren-eiland, the lighthouse island. So that's the only island in this whole area that has a lighthouse and has the history of guiding the ships into the port of Amsterdam and protecting the defense line of Amsterdam as well. It's part of the defense line.
Yeah. For how long has this been a place that you like to come?
Well, it's definitely a place that I rediscovered since my brother started living here. Since my brother started living here, I obviously come here a lot more, and then I really started appreciating it for what it is. But before I also used to take my bike and just do a round to Volendam or Edam, and then this is a beautiful bike route, and it has the spaciousness, like the long views and the horizon and the landscapes that are quite difficult to find in the Netherlands, because there's always something in your view, and there's no mountains to look at or no iconic big things to relate to. But here you have the horizon and the skies and the lake and
And before we get into your entrepreneurship in Amsterdam and the whole dance scene, because that's a whole different part of the world, of course. Where did you grow up? Was nature always something you were at home, or is it something that you discovered later in life?
I grew up in Amsterdam, partly in England, and then in several other spots in the Netherlands. Nature was definitely not a big part of my upbringing. I mean, I was mostly brought up in cities, or at least small towns. But nature did become important quite quickly because of holidays, trips to the Alps. My mother bringing us to a hiking trip in the Lake District in northern England, close to Scotland. And I was always fascinated by mountains. Mountains were and are my first love in nature. Yeah. Okay, great.
So that's interesting, because I have a variety of guests on the show, on this podcast, and I always ask them, what are you? Are you you have sea children, you have sea people, you have forest people, but you're definitely a mountain person then.
I'm definitely a mountain goat, and a lot of people in my family have more relationship to water. So my brother's a sailor, my other brothers sail. And I mean, I love water. I love the ocean, I like to surf. But if I would have to choose, I would always choose for the mountains.
Yeah. And can you explain why?
Oh, there's whole books about this, and it's very... I mean, one of the most important things I think that a mountain, or the feeling that you get from a mountain, is a feeling of humbleness. The feeling that there is something bigger than you, that has a different quality, maybe a different power, maybe even a different spirit. And I think that's something I've always missed in Holland, that like a force of nature or a quality of nature that is so big, it kind of forces you to think about it, or to go within and feel, hey, what does this mean to me?
Right. Your relationship to nature, your place in the world is shown to be maybe smaller than where in the Netherlands all nature is made by us.
Yeah, I think Holland is maybe one of the most prominent examples of a country where we have completely organized nature, dominated nature. We've kept the sea out, and we've built dikes, and we've made land from water. I mean, also here where we're walking, the polder landscapes are famous for the Dutch, and how they made land from water. And I think that's quite typical of our country.
Yeah. In a sense, it's almost the exact opposite of your experience that you told me about. Being in the mountains. That nature is so much bigger than us, and we are only like this very small part of it, but we are a part of it. But interestingly, in the Netherlands, maybe it's even symptomatic of something that's larger and bigger than in the Netherlands, but we feel we are the masters of nature, in a sense.
Well, I think there's a lot of people that have talked and written also about how landscape creates culture and how it shapes identity. So, for instance, in the Netherlands, everything is very close to each other. Everything is flat. So I think that is represented in our culture. Where I'm based now, in Chile, where the distances are huge, there's a lot of mountains, or there's huge forests, or there's the biggest desert in the world, or one of the biggest oceans in the world, or huge fjords. That's the definition of isolation, and that has shaped the Chilean people in a very different way than, for instance, how the Dutch landscape has shaped the Dutch culture. And I think we live in a culture where, everything is fast, everything is efficient, and it's organized, and it's easy to get to places. And I think that in a way, that is connected to the landscape that we live in here.
So you were part of the fast life, the very efficient, the go, the part of, maybe the part of our culture that's, when you first look at it, is almost opposite to what you were just explaining on Chile. Could you maybe I'm wrong, because I don't know what your experience is and how you exactly built up the different venues, but maybe you could just explain a little bit how that came to pass, and what was your... there's obviously part of your soul or part of your identity connected to that part of life.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I feel very connected to music. As a teenager, I was completely into music, and I didn't know anything about what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do in life, and I couldn't choose a study, but I knew I wanted to be in music. But I wasn't a good musician, and there weren't, like there are now, studies that teach you how to be like an event manager or a artist manager or whatever, like the other types of things that you can do in music. But there was a school called the School for Audio Engineering, which is an international school where you get taught about recording music. Mm-hmm. And I thought that would be really interesting, and that would be maybe my way to get into the music industry.
Yeah.
So I did that, and from there I was able to become a technician, an apprentice at a radio station, which was at the time the only radio station that was doing electronic dance music called New Dance Radio.
Yeah. What year is it right now?
98, 99.
Okay. Yeah.
And this radio station had a lot of people that were, big name DJs at the time, all different musical styles and genres. And it was also a station that was almost constantly on the verge of going bankrupt. I was basically the only employee there, and it was a very weird and lonely place to work because during the day, all the music was played from the computer, but then at night all the DJs came and did their programs and shows.
Yeah.
But I learned a lot, and from there I started to become more and more active in nightlife and in music. And
what was the most triggering for you? So it had always been the music itself. So you started audio engineering because that was a way in. But it was always the music itself. How did that came to pass? Was it always you were just hooked instantly when you were younger or something? Or
yeah, I think music can give you all sorts of beautiful feelings and emotions, and ultimately is a way to connect with those emotions. And I think looking back, that's what triggered me the most. How music is this kind of way to connect with yourself and to connect with others.
But that always been but maybe for a lot of people, music is something so universal. People have a direct connection to it. I think it speaks to us in a way that words or maybe a lot of things cannot. But maybe just do you have one moment maybe where you fell in love and where you knew, okay, this, because a lot of people have a connection to music, but then again, not a lot of people then think, okay, whatever it takes, I'm going into the music industry.
Yeah, I don't know. It's sometimes I do things in my life that I'm not rationally aware of, but I deeply feel from my intuition that it's something that I want to do or I need to do. And looking back, and I still think that if you're 18 or 19, how do you know what you want for the rest of your life, and how can you make that choice? In that way, I think the way we think about education and careers is quite crazy, and that we force young people to make those decisions so early, and that often determine a big part of the rest of the rest of their lives.
Yeah, but interestingly enough, so your way has been almost counter the institutions. So I think you're completely correct in saying so. It's weird that you ask an 18-year-old to base their decisions rationally on what they're good at, or what they're not even at what they're good at, but what they will be most successful in life based on how society right now is organized.
Right.
But in a sense, you did the opposite. So you didn't follow rationale. You just followed your intuition, I guess.
Yeah, I was at school and all my friends went to study law or medicine or all that kind of stuff, and I thought about studying philosophy or maybe even anthropology, but I just knew that I would get really, I wouldn't be able to focus for 3 or 4 years or 5 years, and I wanted to work, so
okay.
And actually in between I also I wanted to work, and I went to Austria, to the mountains, to do a ski instructor course. Yeah. And for one season, I worked as a ski instructor, and I guess maybe that was also a formative experience because, you're outside all day, you're working with people, you're in an amazing environment, you're active, so you're physically exhausted at the end of the day, but you're also really fulfilled. Right. I only did it for one season, but it's one of the few things that I look back on and I think maybe I should have done it another season. Or yeah. Okay,
so maybe in the future in Chile, who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. There's great skiing in Chile. Yeah.
All right. So can you take us back? So you were the one-man band at the radio station, and you got into the music, into the DJs. What happened?
So the radio station eventually was bought by ID&T, which was and is a big company that organizes lots of festivals, and at the time they had restaurants and a magazine, and that secured the future of the radio station, and it went on to become ID&T Radio, later Slam FM, and then now I think it's sold and it's called Slam. Or
Yeah.
I was there for a few years, also learned a lot, but after a while it took a direction that I felt was something I didn't connect to. It became more and more mainstream. And
what were you doing? You were still the audio technician, or?
I was what they called station manager, which was anything from scheduling all the programs, doing parts of the website and communication. Some of it was technical stuff, live broadcasts from clubs and festivals, making recordings.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And what did you enjoy most of this time?
I really loved the live radio on location.
Yeah. In the clubs.
Well, I would drive to clubs or to festivals, and I'd have like what they called an ESDN codec. So it was really old-fashioned. You'd have to connect this box by ESDN, so by digital phone line, with the studio back in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And then you could stream the audio live to the radio.
Yeah.
So it was like this pre-internet way of streaming audio.
Yeah. And why did you enjoy this? Because you were there, or you were?
Yeah, because I just think it's magical that you can go to a club and then you get, the left and right audio signal from whoever's playing there, and you plug it into this box, which is ultimately a phone, and then you send it back to the studio, and then that goes up in the air, and people all around the world can listen to it. Cool. Yeah.
So being a part of the spreading of the good news, in a way, the good music.
Yeah. And from there, I met Gert van Veen, who was a famous music journalist at the time, and I started writing more about music, and we started to make a radio show together. And it's true, I've always been, from the music side, passionate about showing other people, like, hey, listen to this, or maybe you don't know this, but this is really good.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of music journalism is also about, giving reviews to people that are really well known or famous, or.
Right.
But we were just only trying to promote the stuff that we thought was really worthwhile.
You could really follow just what you enjoyed, what you liked.
Yeah, and we got a lot of trust and freedom.
Okay, cool.
And it was a good time.
Yeah. And then you started thinking, wait a minute, I can build something on my own. I can do this another way.
No, my older brother Brian was always more active in restaurants, and he and a few partners were starting a club called Club 11 on the 11th floor of the old Dutch Post building, which was a really old building, a really, really beautiful spot with view over the whole city. It was an amazing place, but in the first 2 years, the restaurant was doing really well, but the club was not doing so well.
Yeah.
And our dream was always to work together. And as kids, when we were 18, we'd had brainstorms and think about how we could maybe one day join forces. And then Brian would do the restaurant and I would do the music. And, at 11 or 12 o'clock at night would take away the chairs, and it would become a party. And we already had very distinct ideas about what kind of project it should be and what kind of qualities and what it should be about. And
it's what all the marketing people would call, you had a vision.
Well, I guess we had an idea, and it was about creating like an alternative space for music and food, and it should be about community and not about making money and things like that. Yeah. Very basic. But we found that piece of paper a few years ago, and it was fun to see.
Oh, you saw your brainstorm?
Yeah, we saw the brainstorm. Yeah.
But in a sense, really, you say, okay, so it's simple, but in a sense, it's also revolutionary, because it's so difficult, I guess, that money or power or whatever gets in the way, and that your sense of direction gets thwarted. Has this ever been? I guess when I'm talking to you right now, it doesn't really seem like an issue, but I can still imagine being more and more successful, that sometimes it's maybe a bit harder to stay on course.
I mean, I think in the world and the society we live in, it's always difficult to stay on course. Basically, we live in an economy that doesn't value to, for instance, choose for nature, or it doesn't value to choose for community or for art or there's always the question, and I've had that throughout my whole life. Yeah, but how are you gonna do that? How are you gonna finance that? And it's something that I, in a way, struggle with until today, and probably tomorrow as well. But if I look back, I've always found a way. So I try to tell myself I shouldn't be worrying about it.
Okay.
There's ways to do these things, and
without giving in to lesser ideas or lesser impulses.
Well, absolutely. I feel there's always trade-offs, and you always have to make difficult decisions, and sometimes I also have to choose for economic reasons. But I am quite passionate about choosing the right thing that your intuition says is the right choice, and usually the right choice is something that is something nice, something good, something that's good for the good of everything and everyone, and not something that is just good for your personal financial success.
Yeah. So you're talking about Club Trouw, which has been, world famous for its identity in a way. It's programmed and everything. What are your best memories of that time? And are there any bad memories of that time? So maybe the trade-off that you talked about, how did that came to pass, or did it come up as well?
There's many great memories. Obviously, there's countless nights that I really enjoyed, but also very much I still remember just the connection and bond that we as the whole group had there, like all the people working there, and a big part of that group I think still feels that connection, and if I bump into them, or sometimes I'm still in touch, I think that's something that we share together for the rest of our lives. Right. It became like known for the way we do things and the way we think about things, and that was a collective thing, really a collective thing. And so, I think it shows also the power of community, and how people with different qualities can come together, and if there's a type of trust and a freedom that everybody can express their own ideas and their own visions and their own dreams, then really magical stuff can happen. And we had very difficult years. The first 2 or 3 years at Trouw were really difficult financially, but we stuck to our vision, and in the end it worked. And especially in the last year, we were so confident that we were able to give that trust and that freedom to all the people that are working for us, and I think that made that last year even more magical. Yeah. Because we did a lot of crazy things that other people wouldn't do, or they wouldn't do for financial reasons.
Yeah. I guess even more so than music, although I guess music is also in a sense about connecting people, but the sense of camaraderie and the sense of working together in a way that everyone has his own job to do, and together you're more than the sum of the parts. Yeah. Something like that seems to be the most resonant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think together you can achieve a lot more than just on your own. And I think if you align yourself with those ideas and dreams, then it's almost inevitable that you will become successful. And what that definition of success is different for everybody. Yeah. But in the end, we didn't make huge amounts of money, but it was modestly financially successful. But as a result of trying to do the right things, and not as a result of trying to be financially successful. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes or confusions of our time, that we try to be economically successful, when if you just really do the right thing, I think success is a result, but it's not a goal. Right. It's not something that you should strive for explicitly.
So in a way, you're saying the real search is how to go within, and how to find your own intuition, how to find your own sense of being, of your own sense of, oh, this is for me, what I would love to do. And then success follows, and in a way, so it's internalized success, instead of, okay, what do other people think how success looks like, and trying to strive for that.
Yeah, of course, because if it's connected to who you ultimately are from inside, then it's a lot more powerful. Yeah. If my passion is really to make best pizza in the world, and I've studied, and I know how to collect the right ingredients, and I know how to do this, and I've mastered the art of making dough and the oven, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. People will feel it, and they will taste it, and from there success will come.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to make the best pizzeria with the best economic figures and attracting the most people, well, maybe you're not focusing on the right thing.
Right. And how did it feel closing Trouw? How did it feel ending it? Or how did it feel like, were you sad? Was something, or could you already see that there was okay, there was time for something new? Or
all of it. Very sad, very happy, very fulfilled, in a way proud, confused.
okay, whole range.
Yeah, many emotions at the same time. But I must also say, especially in the weeks after, when we really finished it, finished, physically emptied the building, it was also a huge relief.
Why?
To be able to have finished something that was very significant in my life and big, and maybe also for other people, but actually finish it in a good way, end it, and from that position be able to go somewhere else.
Right.
Instead of, what happens a lot of times in a job, you stay in the job because you're afraid to go for something else, or maybe you constantly are looking for something else, or you're constantly taking other jobs.
Right.
How often in life do we get to finish a project, then take like a few months, to kind of digest and think about it, and then feel, okay, so what do I want in my life now?
Right.
And I think I was really relieved to be relieved from the responsibility. It's a lot of responsibility running a company that big, a lot of staff, but also really relieved and looking forward from there to do something completely different with my life.
Yeah. Sometimes saying no, and in this case it's not saying no, but closing off something creates more space for something new. I mean, that's maybe the only way.
Yeah.
So before we head, in a sense back, maybe because we stranded a little bit on this beautiful spot. Could you maybe just explain a little bit what we're seeing right now? And I mean, the weather is crazy good, and there's no one around, but I'll let you do the talking, and maybe just after, when you finished explaining, just maybe let's settle down and just be quiet for a minute and just enjoy this beautiful spot.
Yeah, we're in the Grote Polder, Eidoorn. So this is a tiny little nature reserve that extends out from Durgerdam towards the Vuurtoren Eiland. So here we're at like a little bird watching spot. It's a tiny lake, and there's I don't know what kind of birds.
One swallow. I saw one swallow.
Okay. I'm not good at birds at all. Surrounded by reeds, and we can see the lighthouse with the flag of the Amsterdam weapon emblem in front of us, and behind us is Durgerdam, and even further behind us is the skyline of Amsterdam, Amstel, and Eiburg.
Yeah. Let's enjoy nature?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We hebben hier kleine poel.
So being now in nature, and you being right now being more and more in nature and less in the city and in the music industry, do you think there's a connection between nature and music? Is there something that's similar or something that's...
Of course. I don't know if I can find the words to express it, but of course there's a connection between music and nature. And actually, I mean, we tend to say that we're in nature now, but we are always in nature. But there's many connections between music and nature. I guess for me personally, it's the way they both make me feel, that they bring me that connection that I'm always kind of looking for. Like a deeper sense of being able to relax and be quiet or be tranquil, or to return to yourself. I mean, there's many types of music and many types of nature that can all evoke very different emotions and feelings, but for me that's probably the most important one, to be quiet and to listen and observe, and to get to that feeling where you think, oh, there's really nothing else in the world that is important right now, and I don't really need anything, and all the stuff that I've just been thinking about and worrying about on the way here on my bike, and all the things that I still need to do before I go back to Chile next week. It's a really long list, but it kind of, it evaporates when you're in spots like this.
Yeah.
And that's real. That's not an illusion. I firmly believe that's something that we should honor, because it's a way of bringing into perspective a lot of things that we worry about, and all the ideas and concepts that we've created in modern society, and all the things that we have to do from ourselves. We have to do this and buy that and be there, and a lot of it is formed by the way we see the world and the way we've created our societies. But we can change those stories if we want to. We can change those conceptions, and we can change the way we see the world. And we can also design it differently and create our own realities. And I don't want to go too deep and philosophical, but I do believe that nature is a way of getting to that point of where you get those ideas. A lot of what is now becoming Valley of the Possible has been conceived while we were walking, while we were doing hikes in North and South America, when we were being in the mountains, when we were camping. And when you walk for a long time, or you're in the forest, it's probably also the physical movement and being offline for a long time. It really creates a different way of thinking and different ideas, and it gave us the opportunity to really be able to listen to your inner self and your voice. Like, what do I still really want, right? Not because you're influenced from all the things that you see in the city, or the things that your friends are doing, or the things that you read in the newspaper or on social media. And even if we came up with really crazy ideas, when you're outside walking, you feel that it's all possible. It's kind of, we can do that.
Yeah.
And obviously when you come back to, let's say, what we would call reality, but it's another reality. When you come back to whatever your living situation is, and you start to do things, of course you encounter obstacles, challenges. But whenever that kind of piles up, it really helps me to go outside and go walking, and then create headspace.
Yeah. So we've built a society, based on capitalism, which obviously is a huge driver of progress, but also of the idea that more is better. And in a sense, you're saying we can build something new, and nature can be a teacher, I guess, because the concepts of eternal growth is not something that is inherent in nature. And I guess nature is more cyclical. Maybe tell us a little bit more about the sense of how nature, you told just a little bit, so how all the ideas came to pass, and in nature how they came up. But maybe tell us a little bit about how you started traveling, And well, maybe what happened during the travel. You just said a little bit about it, but maybe tell it from post Amsterdam.
Yeah, so Mirla, my wife, and me left to Canada, and we bought a camper van, and we wanted to travel to the southernmost tip of South America, to Patagonia. And almost instantly in the first weeks, we encountered a lot of the effects and consequences of climate change and globalization, and a lot of the big fundamental questions of our time that you're not exposed to when you live in Amsterdam, or probably any Western or Northern European city, when you're in a safe urban environment where everything is kind of taken care of and created for you, and whatever is driving that city or economy is sourced from elsewhere in the world. But for instance, in Canada, we quickly were confronted with the wildfires, like huge amounts of wildfires, and then you automatically start thinking about how that happened, and you start to talk to people and you hear things. And then we went to California, and it hadn't rained for 6 years. And the further we got in our travels, the more we were able to actively start out actively to look for certain books, information.
So you were more and more triggered by all these events you saw happening.
Yeah, I was more and more confronted, more and more shocked, and it's stuff that I always knew somewhere cognitively. I was reading about it in the paper when I lived in Amsterdam, but I didn't know how to react. I didn't know how to relate. I didn't know how to do anything with it, and I think that's how a lot of people feel these days. But having the opportunity to be traveling in a van, there was time, there was space, so we started reading a lot, and we started reading about climate change and what people think are the drivers or the sources of it, and we started basically to research and to try and inform ourselves. And the further we got, we were obviously confronted with more and more disastrous consequences, and but also constantly falling in love with many different landscapes and cultures and places. And
so at the same time when you were falling out of love maybe with the society that had created climate change, you were falling more in love with nature.
Yeah, and I realized how great I feel when I'm outside in the mountains or in the forest, and I think there were two things. There was a very important insight that we could no longer be just standing on the sidelines. We really wanted to become active and do whatever we could do and whatever fits our capacities and skills and talents to try and do something, and whether that's creating awareness or doing something concrete, hopefully it's both. And the other thing was maybe a bit more romantic, that we just would really like to live in a more natural, quiet surrounding. And Mirla and me had always dreamt of starting an artist residency, doing something that facilitates creativity and arts and culture and brings together lots of different disciplines, so also science and philosophy and indigenous ways of thinking, but is also really rooted in a specific place where we can involve the community and maybe grow food, plant trees, actively try to conserve a specific spot. And while we were thinking about all of this and writing it down, we found a spot, and we fell in love with a specific valley in southern Chile, in a region called La Araucanía, which is an amazing region where there's volcanoes and the Andes and lakes and beautiful forests, and it's the home of the indigenous Mapuche and Puenche culture, which is not very known outside of Chile, not even that well known within Chile, but it's one of the biggest indigenous groups of South America. And this area is, on one side, super beautiful and maybe even in parts still relatively wild, but it's also known as the poorest region in Chile, which is considered one of the most developed and rich countries in South America. There's a lot of unemployment, history of colonial oppression. And then Chile has this crazy variety of landscapes and climate zones, like the Atacama Desert in the north and the huge ice fields in the south and the Andes and the Pacific Ocean and everything in between. But it's governed for years by this ultra neoliberal capitalist government. So there's all these themes there that I think symbolize a lot of things that are going on a larger scale in the world. And that makes it such a really interesting place to live and to be, because I think we firmly believe that by now our ideas and visions are a lot less romantic than it was 2 or 3 years ago. But we firmly believe that we live in a time where we have to look the beast in the eye, and however daunting or problematic or difficult that is, we need to start creating different ways of living. We need to create different stories of what it is to be human, what it is to be living in these current times. And I think ultimately it comes down to the culture and the worldview we have. And that worldview is that we have come to believe, from ancient times in the agricultural revolution and through religions, that we are separated from nature and that man's place on the world is to dominate nature. But I think we've come to the point where, we've realized that the world is not infinitely able to support our way of living, and that we need to create a different worldview, and so ultimately that means a different culture as well.
Right.
And one of the ways that we feel that we can contribute is using the arts, and that's something that we have been working with for mostly all of our lives, to create new ways of culture.
Yeah. So you touched on a lot of points just now. So you said it's time to look the beast in the eye. I guess you already kind of touched on this, but the beast is us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The beast is mostly us. I think, like for instance, last week when the whole outrage broke about the wildfires in the Amazon, I think a lot of people feel angry and sad and outraged, but a lot of that outrage is pointed towards probably Bolsonaro, maybe the meat industry, the farmers that, are the soya farmers. But ultimately, if you look deeper and you look at the more fundamental reasons, it's a reflection of our current society. It's a reflection of the way we live and the things that we have become, that we've made important, which is growth, which is consuming things, which is flying,
right.
All these things that are damaging the world we live in. So it's a mirror, and it's a mirror that we need to take very seriously. And blaming Bolsonaro or the meat industry will only serve to create bigger divisions. Will only confirm all the worldviews that we have right now, which are very separate, individual, economic, and we need to create a worldview that is more surrounded on, I think, connectedness, community, doing things that are in the benefit of all living things, and not just for economic reasons.
Yeah. So, and you also touched upon the idea that we need a new narrative, a new story, really. I guess what's very interesting to me is that there's also, I guess it's very important to have compassion for people who do not have the awareness that nature is a part of themselves, or that this new paradigm, this different paradigm. Because in a way, in a sense, culture is something like brainwashing, or it's programming, it's software programming. So when you grow up, you're a baby, you're a child, you grow up, there's this story being told, and it's everywhere. I mean, it's in every storybook, and it's from your youth on. So in a sense, raising awareness for this new story, of building a new story, is there should also be a part of compassion, I guess, for everyone who's resisting. Because when I look at myself, it's been a rather long journey to deprogram myself of the idea that I'm separate from nature, and I'm guessing I'm not already there. How do you see this?
Totally. I mean, that story is the story that we've all been told. The story was, to be good and to study and to work hard and to buy a house and, go for a career. And if you get all of that, you'll become happy. Which is obviously not true, at least very much not in my experience. And from the outside, I've probably done a lot of those things, maybe become successful for the outside world, but I very much felt that something was missing and I was not happy, and there's always something that is disconnected, and I think we're all programmed in that way. We've always all been fed the same story, and it's true, we need to be compassionate with people that do not know how to react to these times, or are maybe not aware of these situations and the fundamental questions that are facing us and humanity at this point. But I think everybody to some extent is aware of them, and I think if you can be vulnerable from your own initiative and, for instance, start a conversation based on your own observations and maybe your own worries about, I'm worried about how little birds I'm seeing this year here in the Eidorn, or I'm worried about last summer we were staying for a month here in the harbor, how every day was 30 degrees and how the water level in the harbor was really low and very stagnant, and it was getting green and smelly, and we were thinking if we were able to swim or not, and everybody here in Durgedam was thinking the same way. That's a very normal conversation to have, like, hey, can we swim here? And you don't have to start preaching to people, this is climate change and you have to stop flying and you have to stop eating meat and we all have to change our behavior and we need to do with less. And that's a very negative story. I think if we can create examples that maybe embrace a way of living that is actually better or can be a positive example, then maybe people will be more inclined and more inspired to seek out similar ways of living. And it's not about having to do with less. It's actually about being with more, but it's changing the definition of what is more, and it's changing the definition of what is less.
I guess that's what you're building a new narrative. There's an example that's always been and always stuck with me, is that even if climate change isn't true, then all the stuff we can change to counter climate change is still a good idea. So it's still a good idea to be circular. It's still a good idea not to have gassing emitting in our cities. They're all good ideas. Yes. That's, for me, has always been an interesting way of looking at it, and that's also a positive narrative as well. But I guess that's maybe something different that you're trying to do in Chile, and maybe talk a little bit about that, and especially the part where you, I guess, gathered all these different aspects of life. From science to art to indigenous people to, it almost reminds me of in a very small sense, of what you said before at Club Trouw, of being, everyone has their part to play and you're all part of something bigger. Maybe I'm seeing it wrong, but maybe tell me a little bit about that. Oh no,
I think I totally agree in the sense that a lot of people might see or hear my story, he's going, quote unquote, back to nature. I see a lot of similarities between Trouw and Valley of the Possible, and I see them more and more the further the project develops. Because ultimately, Valley of the Possible is also trying to create a different and alternative platform for culture. We're trying to create ways of being together and thinking of new ideas and facilitating artistic expression, bringing people together, doing inspiring things. Many of those were very similar to the goals that we had at Trouw, but it's reacting to a different time. And
or a different inherent need in you?
Also, yeah, obviously my worldview has changed from traveling, and I already felt that I didn't want to start another club. But now after traveling, I also know I could never go back to that way of living. I just could not imagine it.
It's not fulfilling in the same deep sense, maybe, or
I can't close my eyes to all the things that I've seen and read. It's impossible to not do anything.
Right.
And that doesn't mean I'm enlightened, and it doesn't mean I'm perfect, and it still means that sometimes I have to buy things. I still have to fly sometimes, but that doesn't mean that I can try and contribute in a way and try to do something that at least fits my capabilities and way of involving people, my network, or people that I've worked with before, and engaging the arts towards something that I think is the most valuable thing that we have, and the most important question of our time is how can we still live, and how can we progress but in a different way.
Right. In your vision, how would it look like in 2 years or in 5 years, and in a practical sense? What's your dream, I guess? My question is.
Specifically for Valley of the Possible?
Yeah, specifically for Valley of the Possible.
Well, we've just finished our first year, and we've done our first residency program. So we gathered artists and scientists from different parts of the world, and the first program was based around getting to know this specific valley in this region, and both its cultural, social, and ecological layers and characteristics. From the idea that you first need to know a place before you start doing something there. Mm-hmm. Now that we've studied it more and have different perspectives on what it is that's there, we can start to develop what is actually the refugio, how we call it. Mm. So we're going to start building a cabin soon. We'll be creating a workspace with a Chilean architect who lives in Rotterdam. We'll be starting a permaculture program. So we're basically focusing the next year on creating the infrastructure so that when the next group of artists come, next April 2020, they will have their own accommodation. They will have a space where they can work. Because up until now, there's one lodge in this valley. For the rest, nobody lives there. And it's kind of like a little eco-tourism lodge. And it worked really well. But for the long term of our project, obviously, we need to have our own facilities.
So the biggest part of it is getting scientists and artists together to, I guess, build a new narrative, or what happens when they get together?
Basically, what we're trying to do is create a platform where all these different disciplines and thinkers and makers can come together and create new narratives on how we relate to the planet, how we relate to nature, to ourselves.
Yeah.
We're not actively directing in which direction that should go. We're facilitating the discussion and the platform and a place where those people can have those dialogues and do research, and where they can connect with nature, but where they can also connect with indigenous cultures who have a completely different view of the world and nature than northern or western societies. So in our dream, that's an ongoing process that's never finished. Even, let's say, in the most hopeful scenario, in 10 years, we've found all these solutions to climate change, then I still think it's valuable to bring together different backgrounds and different disciplines to create new ways of being, because I certainly hope that we don't continue to live in a world where consumerism and stuff and the way we treat animals or all those things that are going on. I certainly hope that there's a better world out there, and that we are the people in the generation that are able to change that. So I think it's an ongoing process. It will never be finished.
Yeah. I guess that's so interesting, because the idea of that something like this, that culture can be finished, is completely, again, counter to what nature tells us or what indigenous cultures tell us is that it's an ongoing, it's always a process. And I guess the idea of storytelling itself is giving every new generation their roots from millions of generations back. So in 1990, the end of civilization, or the the idea that we discovered, or we enabled capitalistic liberalism to democratic liberalism, and we just only had to see for the next couple of years to have this great idea spread around, and then would be done, and society and utopia would be set in place. And I guess that whole idea of being finished with progress, or having something that's it, is just completely. I guess that's what you're saying as well. Is that the story always needs to continue, even if there's a utopia.
Yes, and the story always changes, and I think that's something that we're not always aware about. We tend to see science as an objective truth, but science is just another way of looking at the world. It's also a narrative, it's also a perspective. 500 years ago, science said that the earth was flat. Then there came new insights that proved that the world was round. And so today we're also still learning those things. So there is no absolute truth. There's always different stories, and all these stories define our culture, and all these stories define the way we live.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting to embrace that and then think of a way that we can maybe also influence it.
Yeah.
And hopefully from perspectives that are different than economic perspectives.
Yeah.
Because that's now the dominant story, right? Everything is related to economics.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't realize that the economy is also a set of agreements and ideas and rules that we have created to structure and organize our society.
Right.
But it's something that you can change.
Right.
And it's been changing all throughout the history of humankind in the world. The thing is it going to change from us, from within, actively? Or is it going to change by force because we fucked up and, economic or ecological collapse happens, or at the same time?
Yeah. Unfortunately, people need crises to really see that what they've been doing is wrong. But then true change can only happen from within, I guess. And I think too many times in the past, the true lesson had never been learned.
No. And I mean, we have yet to see what that true lesson is, and if we will learn it. I do also feel that it's something that I hear a lot when I'm here in Amsterdam. People say, yeah, well, things are never going to change. People need to learn the hard way. Which is also basically saying, fuck you, I don't need to change. It's just going to happen, and when it happens, we're all fucked anyway. It's a very nihilistic, negative way. And like you said earlier, even if it's not true, climate change, or even if we solve it, there's still so many reasons to do things in a different way, because they're just going to create a more beautiful world.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I am becoming more hopeful about the signs of change, for instance, because of groups like Extinction Rebellion, who give a very activist voice to a large group of the population that up until now maybe doesn't know how to express that voice. Okay, maybe we've been buying organic stuff, or we switched to green energy, maybe we even have solar panels, maybe we even have an electric car, but voicing the need for a different way politically, actively, has been really difficult.
Yeah.
And I think what Extinction Rebellion does really well, that they've studied all these big changes in society in the last 150 years. The civil rights movement in America with Martin Luther King, and what happened in India with Gandhi, and all these different things. And they've come to analyze what things need to happen for big societies to change. And it's usually connected to large civil disobedience.
Yeah.
It has to be peaceful.
Yeah.
It has to be fun. So there needs to be music,
Yeah.
art, food, noise.
Yeah.
It has to be disciplined. So you cannot be, stereotyped as crazy,
Right.
hippie,
Right.
lefty, greeny,
Yeah.
aggressive
Yeah.
activist.
Yeah.
No, it has to be super well executed, strategically thought out, but at the same time, very truthful. I mean, they're saying it like it is.
Yeah.
It really is about time that we change things, and
Yeah.
I think they're gathering really a lot of momentum and a lot of people all around the world in different cities. And of course, someone like Greta Thunberg,
Yeah.
who, for me, proves, we live in a society where we're constantly, but what does it matter if I change? Because look at the collective.
Yeah.
Which is strange, right? Because if I see people around me in Amsterdam and they all have the same organic, hip, vegan sneakers,
Yeah.
I want to have them as well, because that's how it works.
Yeah.
And that's also how it works with other society and cultural changes. If you see other people doing it, you're encouraged to do the same.
Yeah.
And Greta, who was 14 or 15, just decided to not go to school. In our society, that's normally considered a useless action. That doesn't mean anything. You're just one person.
Yeah.
How can that mean anything?
Right.
Fast forward a year,
Yeah.
and she has millions of supporters around the whole world
Yeah.
who see her as like the main leader in a world
Yeah.
without leaders, basically.
Right.
And that just stems from one girl
Yeah.
not going to school and putting a sign up saying, I'm not taking this shit any longer.
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's an amazing and a very hopeful and a very powerful
Yeah.
way of change. And
So for many people, it feels, as an individual, there's no sense in helping or changing. And I guess what nature, I mean, the new paradigm, what you're talking about, the new narrative, if you can truly feel part of something, so if you really truly feel part of nature, if you truly feel part of society, then obviously what you do matters.
of course, and the individual, the reason why we don't feel that individual change does anything, because it's connected to the economic worldview that we have.
Yeah.
And which has been told to us time and again. You are a unique individual. You can be anybody who you are, as long as you do this, buy this product, study that, and you will be able to be successful. But don't think that you're connected to others.
Right.
Well, it's quite double. In a way, it's also, there's a lot of marketing that is supposed to connect us to communities. But I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. I guess also one thing is when you hear indigenous people talk. I mean, a couple of times we already touched on this. Their sense of also being part of nature, but also a sense of community is completely different, because there truly is a community, of course, because they have maybe 100, maybe 200 people that they all know, and they all take care of each other. I mean,
And nature is the community. The forest, the trees are the community. They feel sad or they mourn when the forest that they partly live from or live with is destroyed, and rightly so.
Yeah.
And that's actually also something that's happening in our current society. A lot of people are feeling very emotional and very sad about, the glaciers melting and realizing that they might not come back. But that sadness, that grief, there's no way to deal with that in our society.
right.
We know how to deal with a family or a friend who dies. But how do we deal with a glacier that will never come back? How do we deal with a bird species that is extinct forever?
Yeah.
And I think the indigenous worldviews have a lot to learn from in that sense.
Yeah.
They don't have all the answers. We shouldn't romanticize them, thinking that they have all the answers to a lot of the problems that Western society created. But we can learn from each other.
Yeah. And I guess you're right. That I mean, it's what you can truly learn. And that's what we touched on earlier, is the most difficult part of what you can learn from them is their way of interacting to the world and to each other. And this is something that's culture. So that's something that's been ingrained in them from thousands of years back, and something that we've lost touch with. So in a sense, that's quite a challenge, I guess. But you're taking it on, I guess, the challenge, and saying, let's build this new narrative that people experience and understand that this new story is actually a pretty great story, and it's a good story to be a part of, and it's a fulfilling story as well, I guess. As we're nearing our end to our walk and also to our conversation, maybe, and this is going to be a tricky question, I guess, but you told about the fact that it's a happy story in a sense, and it's a fulfilling story. Could you tell this story in so not in just 1 hour, but in 2 sentences, or in can you encapsulate the idea of the feeling of this new story, I guess, that you're building, or maybe hoping for that will be part of us all?
Wow, that's a big question, but I guess we're trying to create a narrative and a world that respects the life of everyone and everything on this world, and a way of living that can secure the prosperity of all of that, and not just the benefit of the individual or the benefit of a government or a company, but the benefit of all. And in a way, there is already an example. I mean, if you define something as nature or a system or Gaia or whatever, that example is already there. And we used to know how to do it. We just need to find a way of doing it again.
To remember.
Yeah, and I like to think of it as not back to nature, but forward to nature. It's not a romantic step, or it's not a nostalgic step back.
Right.
It's actually a progressive step forward, but it's a different progression.
So Forward to Nature, I guess we'll change the name of the podcast.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, but I know exactly what you mean. And well, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you so much for this walk. Thank you so much for showing me Durgerdam again, reminding me that I should come here more often. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
You have been listening to a special edition of Back to Nature, the podcast of Club Groeneveld and Sublime, in proud cooperation with ADE Green. With special thanks to Olaf Boswijk, ADE Green, Zoe van Lieren, Rick Waldman, Marcel Tjepkema and Louis Bijl de Vroe. Want to know more? Visit our website at www.clubgroeneveld.nl.